I think we got a couple.
Oh, I guess we do. Well, I was just calling
Hang on.
them. And, oh, I guess there's a job. Yeah, there's a job. Okay. So, sorry.
I'm almost a downer for a party.
I know.
Where's the agenda for the party?
All right, so has everybody had a look at the agenda? And could I have somebody approve the agenda? Maureen? Okay, Sue, all in favor? Thank you. Okay, let's move on to the next program. Hi, James, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
It's really good.
Want to thank everybody for accommodating me today, especially Councillor Nicholson, who invited me to come speak on this special committee of the whole. So it's an honor to speak with you on this, have so much of your undivided attention on this topic, which I think is a really exciting regulation and an opportunity for local governments around the province. So I'm going to start off. I've got about a 20-minute presentation, and then I'm hoping that I can move through it quickly enough to allow lots of time for questions. So just to introduce myself, I think most of you know me, James Glaive. I'm with Glaive Communications, and I have been working with the Step Code Council, which is the cross multi-sector body that's been set up to oversee implementation of the Step Code, and it was the same group that developed it. And I'll get into telling you a little bit more about that organization in the presentation. So, what is the BC Energy Step Code? The BC Energy Step Code is a new provincial regulation that local governments may use, if they wish, to either incentivize or require a level of energy efficiency in new construction that goes above and beyond the requirements of the BC Building Code. Builders can use this as well voluntarily if they wish. It was signed into regulation in April of last year and came into force in the middle of December 15th. And really what's interesting and exciting about it is it gives local governments a powerful tool to reduce their emissions, improve energy efficiency, and it also, for the industry side, gives a strong set of requirements, a common shared language across the province, and a clear signal on where the code is going. So instead of just waiting for a code update that lands, okay, we got to make sense of this. This is a really clear set of forecasts to show where the energy efficiency improvements are going. There's a couple of important characteristics I want to just outline before I dive in. First of all, it's performance-based. So the existing energy efficiency requirements of the code are prescriptive. They say there's 150 pages or 200 pages, and you can use this wall with this window and this door and this insulation. This basically is a completely different approach. It sets targets that are measurable that buildings have to reach to ensure compliance with a given step. And so it's entirely up to the builder, the architect, the designer to figure out how to meet that. It applies to new construction only. This doesn't apply to renovation work. And just a point about using it, governments can only require the lower steps, the entry-level steps 1 through 3 with homes, but they can incentivize the upper steps. This is until 2020. They can incentivize the upper steps by giving it added density and so forth, if they like to. But they can't require that very high level right off the bat until industry has a chance to build capacity to deliver it. That's the idea there. Okay, so we'll get into that as well. Okay, so this is a nice little illustration that explains essentially what it does. It's a roadmap to take the province to the year 2032. That is when the provincial government has set a goal that all new construction will reach a net zero energy ready level of energy efficiency. That is essentially the most efficient building that you can build today. And it's roughly equivalent to the Passive House Standard, which you may have heard of. There's other labels and programs in the market that deliver that. So in the coming years, the idea is that governments climb these steps between today, when step 1 is basically existing code, to step 5, in the example of homes. Over the years, gradually governments are to climb that ladder, and as capacity increases, as costs come down, gradually we get towards that net zero target year. So Wanted to just speak briefly about the context with senior governments around this. Federally, last summer, the federal government released a building strategy you see on the right there. It's a sort of a build out of the Pan-Canadian Framework, which is the National Climate Plan. It essentially makes a series of commitments that sends the message to the market and to the economy that the federal government is very serious about moving to much more efficient buildings as a pathway to reaching its climate change targets. Essentially, starting this year, there's a lot of funding available from the feds for research, development, demonstration projects, and so forth. And they're aiming towards a more stringent model, national model energy code by 2020. And essentially, they're looking for the same goal, 2030, of net zero nationwide. So they're providing a signal, and this is a very fascinating document if you ever get a chance to look at it. It's very visionary for a federal government document. It says things like, come on in, the future feels fine. Not the kind of thing you usually hear out of the feds. So it's quite exciting. Provincially, just very briefly, the STEP code was born out of or aligned with the goal I mentioned of being net zero ready by 2032. And just to be clear, a net zero energy building essentially is so efficient that it can meet all of its own energy needs on site if it needed to. Solar panels on the roof generate enough electricity that it could meet all of the needs of that building. So you wouldn't necessarily need to be connected to the grid with a net zero energy building. So they're 80% more efficient than a typical new building today. So this is the recently appointed Climate Solutions and Green Growth Advisory Council, which the new government set up to basically give advice on how to implement all of the suggestions of the previous government's climate leadership team. Government set sector-specific targets, so there's going to be a target coming out of Victoria for buildings and a climate target, and so the STEP code is obviously a really powerful tool to meet that. So the province, I should say, is not making a heck of a lot of noise about the STEP code right now. They really kind of want to just offer it out to local governments and see what the pickup looks like. They don't want to be pushing it down people's throats. It's a tool that's available, and they want to be careful about that their jurisdiction is just to simply offer it and see what the take-up looks like. So who developed it? So all the logos on the left there are the members of the Energy STEP Code Council. As you can see, you've got the Urban Development Institute, the British Columbia Construction Association, the engineers, the Greater Vancouver Home Builders Association. All of these large construction and development industry trade associations developed it together, negotiated the standards in it in conjunction with UBCM, LGMA, all of these other groups. Fortis and BC Hydro have also been actively at the table. So it really is a very broadly supported regulation as a result. What does it measure? This is great, we're moving right along here. So with a Part 9 of the building code, which is the part of the code that covers houses, homes, and smaller buildings, it measures building envelope, equipment and systems, and air tightness. And essentially each step of the STEP code has specific measurable numbers for each of those areas that a building must meet and must demonstrate and be proven to have demonstrated compliance. There's different sets of steps for larger Part 3 commercial buildings as there are for Part 9 homes. There's also different requirements for different parts of the province and recognition that it's colder up north. They've relaxed the requirements that are needed to meet it. So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, but it is a common language within climate zones in the province. And again, builders aren't told how to meet them, they're just told what they are, and it's up to them to innovate and find solutions that work. What does it require of builders? Really three major steps. First of all, for all steps, builders are required to retain the services of a certified energy advisor. And these are professionals that will take the plans of a proposed building and plug them into energy modeling software that will allow them to determine is this building going to meet these requirements based on For example, HVAC mechanicals, orientation, how many windows on which side of the building, and so forth. And they can essentially tune and tweak their design in the software before the foundation is poured to be assured that it's going to meet a certain performance level. The building then they get essentially, once they have that, they show that to the building inspector, they get their permit, they start construction, and then they need to be conscious of, obviously, the approaches recommended through that energy modeling software. The design has been changed already. Pay attention to materials, sealing, and so forth. And then there's on-site testing. And this is usually done in the middle of construction when the framing and the envelope is sealed, and then later on. And that verifies that the building's airtight to the levels that this given step requires. So how does it essentially work? So I'm just going to walk us up the ladder here for the step code for homes, part 9. There's 5 steps. Step 1 is essentially just verifying that a builder is doing what the current building code requires. There's been compliance challenges. BC Housing's done some research and found that a significant portion of new builds don't even meet the requirements of code on energy efficiency. So this essentially makes sure that everything that's out there that is just built to code is being built to meet those levels. It proves it, it verifies it through the measurements.
You mean
Yes,
things don't even meet step 1 of the existing building code?
exactly. Yeah.
So,
So then,
Can we
Yes,
ask
sorry.
questions as we go?
Yep.
I thought you said all these things were in addition to the existing building code.
so everything above step 1
Oh, everything.
is a requirement beyond building
On
code.
step 1 is the existing building.
Exactly, they call it enhanced compliance. It's essentially just verifying that these buildings are being built to the requirements of code on efficiency.
And doesn't a building inspector check that code is being
No,
followed?
because to do that, they need to do a blower door test, and they need to do an energy model, and those things aren't being done, essentially. So, or they are checking, are we following the prescriptive path? Yes, there's insulation, but we really don't know if the requirements are being met consistently. So industry has expressed that. We know we're not doing a great job there. So this essentially is the baby step to get started.
So if municipality adopted step 1,
Mm-hmm.
then what would that look like then? Then the building inspector would be required
So
to go and do an energy test?
No, so the building inspector would merely verify that that test had been done.
To be done, so the builder would be required?
The builder is responsible for retaining an energy advisor to run the model and to run the blower door
And then
test.
it's the building inspector's responsibility to
Exactly.
check that that's being done?
Exactly, and there's a standard compliance form that's available that they can go, okay, well, step 3, and then the report is given, and here's the numbers, and check, you made it, off you go.
So at the moment, there's no requirement for
No.
the building inspector to ask for that?
Anybody got a building inspector handy?
There's no requirement for it.
No requirement for it?
Daniel.
So, I mean, I'll say, essentially, you're right in terms of, right now, you're applying for something under the BC building code, right, which has emissions stuff in it, but it has, quality, so the building inspector would say, okay, it needs a, 2x6 walls, those are 2x4, it needs insulation of this value, but there's no mechanism then for them to check. Like, they can check if the insulation's in, but you don't have to check the performance of the building,
Right.
because it's, you don't know, okay, are there little cracks in it or something, right? There's no sort of test for that. So step 1 would say the builder would have to complete the blower test
Uh-huh.
to confirm that you've met the current BC building code emission standards.
So that your house is performing to that basic?
That's right.
And then if it didn't, then the builder would then be required to go back
And fix it.
And fix it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
okay.
so even adopting step 1 would have benefits?
It would have benefits, yes,
Okay,
in that people would be required to meet what's already required.
required.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to keep going here. So the first 3 steps of the Part 9 step code for homes are, each step, as you see on the right, represents an increased level of energy efficiency. And there's a lot of buildings already in the market that meet these steps. Our Energy Star buildings, R2000, Built Green, all of these green building programs that have been out there and being used, and in some cases have been required by local governments, created a lot of familiarity with this level of building in the marketplace. So the next steps up though, 4 and 5, are higher steps, and these are considered more ambitious. They're going to involve larger upfront costs for the builder, and they were going to require a bit of a rethink of traditional building practices. It's not tuning and polishing around the middle, it's a different approach, essentially. Much thicker walls, you're going to be looking at triple glazed windows, you're going to be looking at thermal breaks so that there's no wicking of heat through the building to the outside world, through the framing of the building itself. So there have been buildings built in BC to these standards, but there aren't too many of them out there yet. And many of them have been built through local government policy and incentives. And again, the top step is net zero energy ready. So I put down a number of benefits here that have been assembled from various sources of better performing buildings. So I'm going to walk through them quickly. They're more comfortable to be in because you don't get the spikes of temperature falling off and reheating the baseboard heater clicking on and off all day. They manage fresh air more actively throughout the building, which means that you're getting oxygen as you sleep instead of sleeping in a gradually oxygen-deprived room, sort of like on a cross-country flight. The air quality goes down, so the buildings have much more they're healthier for people. That's a demonstrable impact. Soundproofing is not an issue on Bowen Island, given how nice and quiet it is here, but that goes into the anyway. You won't be able to hear that eagle, so maybe you wouldn't want to have this. But certainly reducing electricity costs and utility costs is a huge one. These buildings will be much more affordable to heat and operate into the foreseeable future because the performance is designed into the very skin of the building. It doesn't rely on equipment so much. It's more of the way the building is designed from the walls out. Greenhouse gas emissions, not as much of a factor here again on Bowen because we're not on the gas grid. New homes that are connected to the gas grid, like those in the North Shore, would see a significant fall off in greenhouse gas emissions. There's a green economy story around this because the high performance building products that right now builders are sourcing, many of them come from overseas. There are window, for example, and door companies in the Fraser Valley that are really excited by this because it will legislate and require a higher level and allow them to develop more product lines to serve that need here. So the money stays in the BC economy. And finally, the industry benefits. It provides that consistency and predictability for industry that they've been looking for, so they know where the long-term goal is going. And again, it provides this common language of energy efficiency that they can all use. Any questions on that list before I go on to the current status? Allison?
So all these things are upfront costs when you're building the building? And-
All of these things.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Well, the more
I'm going to
thicker
get.
walls, more
Yeah,
insulation.
so that's my next slide.
Okay, so you're gonna get into how the mortgage companies look at this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, not mortgage companies, but I'll look at capital costs here.
Yeah, okay.
So, okay. What does it cost? The very first question, of course, on everybody's lips. So last year, BC Housing commissioned what is the most exhausting and ambitious study of the costs of high-performance housing types ever taken in Canada. Well, they published it last year. It's been in the works for several years. And what they found is that meeting the requirements of the lower steps involve only very modest construction premiums. Again, lower steps, they say across many types, less than a 2% construction cost premium above that of a home built to the requirements of the building code. This is referencing steps 1 through 3. Again, upper steps have higher costs. So what does that look like in a specific example? Well, they did some hypothetical modeling and projects in that study. And I'm sorry that's small to read, but essentially this is a hypothetical 6-unit townhouse, row house in Surrey, where the prices of these new units would be somewhere about 550 to 800K for a 1,700 square foot unit. And if you look where the error there is, they've calculated that out as just under $3,000 added to the per unit build cost of each of these units.
At what step level?
This is for step 3, and you can see that steps 4 and 5 are also on there, but that premium gets higher. It gets up to $5,500 to $9,000 per unit to reach the passive house equivalent level of performance. So there are
That's not
additional
bad.
costs, but when you're looking at a $500,000 to $800,000 home, a premium of $3,000.
You're gonna see that, what, the first year in your hydro bills?
And so you'll immediately see lower hydro bills right off the bat.
Good question. I mean, this relates to the construction costs. What about the evaluative costs, the bringing in of the energy advisor
Yeah.
and so forth?
Water,
So,
yeah.
So I'll get to that in a moment.
okay, great.
And is
Bear
that
with
an
me.
average, the 2,950? Because your units are ranging in size.
Yes, but they're all the same. It's modeled based on all being that same size unit. So
Okay,
it's
how- and the price
560 to 560 there.
Yeah, but if you've got a price range of 550 to 800,
I think that is not based on units within that development. That's based on
Okay.
where the development is.
Okay.
So next to
yeah,
is
because
Canada
condos are
Line
usually
Station.
priced at so much a square foot,
Right,
plus a
right.
bonus for
Right.
being an end user.
There was another climate type or building type they looked at. They looked at a whole bunch. I just pulled out a couple for this presentation. But here's a medium-sized single-family detached home of 2,500 square feet, again in Surrey. This home would sell between 800 and 2.2, and their calculations, they figure it'll add about $3,600 to the capital cost of building to that higher energy performance level. So those are the costs. So the conclusion of the report was that energy efficiency and affordability go hand in hand, in the sense that maybe that's not an affordable house to you, but certainly it doesn't break the bank in terms of adding another level of energy efficiency. So as a result, that report made the following recommendation: begin at step 3. And you would think, why wouldn't you start at step 1? Well, essentially, the modeling revealed that the costs of going from step 1 to step 3 are marginal, and going from step 2 to step 3 are small. And essentially, what we're doing is, if we're starting at step 1 for years and years, you're essentially creating a whole swath of homes that will have to be retrofitted in future, and just adding to that burden of the existing housing stock that needs to be retrofitted. So they're unlikely to impact housing affordability, and they're within range of typical variations in construction costs from year to year over the past 10 years.
Does the step code apply to renovations? Or
No, new
So
construction
it's
only.
only,
That's right.
and it doesn't apply to extensions?
Extensions? No, I don't think so. I think you need a substantially new.
New,
Yeah.
standalone?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. How's my time? Okay, not much. I'm going to just skate through the last part here. Based on that finding in that report, a coalition of NGOs has coalesced called 3 for All, and they are advising or advocating for local governments to start at step 3, because they say the costs of doing so are minimal while the benefits are substantial. So these are the organizations that are behind that effort: Passive House Canada, Canada Green Building Council, Pembina Institute, and others, architecture and construction leaders and consulting firms. So where are we at now? 15 governments have notified the province that they intend to use the step code, including all 3 North Shore governments, and as well Surrey and Richmond. And this evening, the District of West Vancouver will vote on whether they adopt step 3 at the start, right out of the gate, effective this July, which is essentially what the City of North Vancouver has done. Last October, the council there voted to require step 3 across the community on all new homes as of this July. And so soon after, the District of North Vancouver followed suit and set the same standard, and West Vancouver is expected to do the same thing tonight. And so doing so creates a North Shore, essentially, common market And builders will have the same expectations from one project to the next, whether they're across jurisdictional lines or not. Finally, I just came across this since my presentation last week. BC Hydro is offering $20,000 grants for communities to offset or incentivize implementation costs, and this is answering your question, Maureen. And this is intended to reduce the cost for builders of obtaining an energy advisor and getting their blower door tests done. So that could be set up any number of ways, and the STEPCO Council Best Practices Guide that Daniel has a copy of suggests a whole bunch of different approaches for that as well. And that's it for my presentation. Councillor Faust.
Well, I'm fascinated, thank you very much. And I think it would be great for us to start thinking about not just community-wide, but also the 3 community buildings that we're thinking of building new. The Fire Hall Emergency Operations Center, the water treatment plant, and the community center, municipal hall. Just in terms of how we think about those at the stages that we're at. Did you have something to add? How are other communities dealing with their own new municipal buildings?
So the Energy STEPCO Council has produced a best practices guide for local governments, and that explicitly sort of sets the challenge out in the same way that many local governments required lead in the past for green buildings that they build. The invitation is out to say, if you're building a new municipal building, this is a chance to show leadership and to help build capacity in your community by building it to the upper steps. So nobody can tell the municipality what to do. It's entirely up to your decision, but that guidance has been offered.
Who produces that best practices guide?
The Energy STEPCO Council, which is that cross-sector coalition that I highlighted earlier. And Daniel has a copy of it.
Is all 3 the cross coalition, or is that something different?
I'm sorry, I
You
couldn't
had
quite-
something called all 3?
Oh, that's a different
That's different,
intensity.
okay.
That's an advocacy coalition. I just wanted to flag that it's out there, and they might be calling you up, and we're sending them a postcard.
So at this point, we don't have a step code that's specific for commercial buildings or institutional buildings. How do you see that moving forward? We've got the residential side of it. Will they be similar requirements, or?
So there are step code specifications. There's a staircase for the Part 3 part of the building code that deals with the larger buildings, including high-rises, and commercial buildings such as retail stores and so forth. I'm not positive there's one for a civic building like a community center, but it's certainly any architect or builder can say we're going to choose the nearest approximate levels of performance that are being required in the Part 3, the closest Part 3 set of guidelines.
Okay.
So I also know that the city of Richmond has built a passive house fire hall recently. So HCMA Architects built that, designed that.
So has Hornby.
Do you have any example, are any other smaller rural communities looking at this?
Yeah, well, there was a bunch on Vancouver Island there, gate back.
Yeah.
So Campbell River, Comox, Duncan, Victoria, Saanich, and North Saanich are all considering this. I know that those are all larger than this one.
Yeah.
But there's a network that's been formed of planners that are communicating with each other that represent smaller communities, regional districts, and so forth.
Yeah.
And they're all comparing notes on that. So Daniel has access into that, I think, and he'd probably be able to give you some information on that.
So, Jen, so that is, just for clarification, it's for residential only at this point in time, this part of the step code.
I believe that some of these local governments have specified intent to do it in institution or commercial use as well.
Yeah.
I think North Van is requiring step 1 or 2 for the Part 3 of the building code that addresses that. I'm not
Because
positive.
part 9 is homes and part 3 is commercial buildings?
Yeah, well, part 9 is homes and simple buildings, so it's essentially a building 3 stories or lower, right? I'm looking at my architect friends. And part 9 is 4 or higher and more complex, i.e. commercial.
Part 3?
Part 3 is. Part 9 is homes and
The
simple
simple
buildings. Yeah.
So most of all those new multifamily in North Van are all 5 stories, so they'd all be in the.
They'd be covered
complex.
under part 3 of the building code and the step code applying applicable to part 3. Yeah. There's a square footage size,
5,500 square feet, I think it is,
right, 5,500.
roughly.
Above that, I mean?
There's a whole bunch of variables there. It depends on the occupancy type
Okay.
as well. So for example, you could have a gymnasium because it has a lot of people on it, that would be part 3 automatically. So
Right, gotcha, thank you.
So,
Yeah, I would just, so what's going to be the monitor of the energy code? It's going to be both the modeler, obviously you have to bring in the modeler and you have to build to that modeler's specification, and also the blow test, I guess. But that's the only real measure, is it? I'm not getting it wrong.
Okay, so the the certified energy
Yes.
advisor does both of those tests.
Yeah.
And the software that happens at the very front end essentially checks your plans and be able to tell you. The software says, this is what the measures that this will reach based on this size furnace, this many windows, and so forth. So you can largely reach compliance before you pour any concrete, just by tweaking your plans based on needing to meet those requirements. Except for the air tightness, that needs to
Well, yeah,
happen
that's,
once it's
that would
built.
be the big one, yeah.
Yeah.
And you say most of the onus is on the builder
You-
to achieve that
That's
air
right.
tightness.
That's right, that's
That's
right.
the pressure test, is that?
Yep,
Yeah.
you depressurize the
Yeah.
building with a big fan that sucks all the air out, and then the
Yeah.
air starts coming in around cracks, and that's where they can see where the air is getting in. And
Yeah.
also measure down to the very precise, I don't know what the measurement is, but exactly how airtight the building is.
Yeah, just
So-
percentage-wise, and the percentage would make the difference in what step.
That's right.
Part of the
It's expressed in air changes per hour.
Yeah.
The amount of times the entire air volume in the building will be traded out in an hour based on leaks and penetrations in the building envelope.
Yeah.
And so a passive house building is 0.6 air changes per hour, and that's the very highest net zero energy level. And most houses today are, does anybody know? 6, 10,
Yeah.
15, they're nowhere near. So
Interesting. So is the target to have all homes by 32?
2032, all new construction.
All new construction,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, I don't see anything going on retro here.
I think it's coming.
Yeah, that's, you
Again,
mentioned
because
one
of that-
retrofitting here.
Yeah, because of that provincial government target for
Yeah.
building sector emissions, I almost guarantee you we're going to see legislation and incentives and support to tackle existing buildings.
But you say buildings that are emissions, now what do you mean by?
So buildings represent 11% of all greenhouse gas emissions in British Columbia, and it's mostly through heating of the building through natural gas.
Okay, because we heat here with hydro.
Right, so climate is not as strong of a benefit of using the step code here for that reason, because our electricity is pretty clean.
And they're not climate-based at all.
No, the targets are not climate-based.
Okay.
It's just that is a co-benefit of building a high-performance home, is that there will be fewer greenhouse gas emissions, again, assuming natural gas is.
So there becomes a function of insulation and
Right.
disconnecting all the walls and stuff like that. My only argument is with cost. I think it's going to be very expensive. It's going to be.
2%.
Well,
We saw the numbers there.
well, I was looking at the numbers too, but I can't agree with those numbers.
Okay.
And I don't agree with the costs in their building, because we're building here 300, 350 a square foot, as opposed to, the example we gave is
Mhm.
250. So, in which case, it's obviously going to be a hell of a lot more expensive than here, but it still might be the same percentage, I guess, if you look at it that
So
way.
the cost that you said that went in, was that the cost of having the certified advisor
No.
check the plans?
Those are just the capital construction costs of
Okay, so
of
how much is
building
all the others?
different-
Well, they're going to be at least 5,000 each.
5,000 feels high. The quotes I've had from energy advisors on the mainland, however, are more in the range of 1,100 to $2,000
Per session?
per project. So
Oh,
that's
okay.
2 blower door tests plus an energy model. So if you're paying 5, well, you're paying a lot.
That surprises me, because you get somebody to come in and check the, for asbestos. They're in your house for an hour, it's a $2,500 bill.
Well, I'm just going by from City Green Solutions, which is a Victoria company that does that. I called them and asked them for an estimate. And
Good.
that's the number they gave me on Friday. So.
Awesome.
And also that BC Hydro incentive is, funding is available to offset that for at least the near term. So,
Oh, that's good.
Well, it's 20,000 per
20,000.
community at $2,000 a pop, that's only 10 houses.
It's a start.
10 new houses.
Yeah.
Good way to jumpstart.
Neat.
I had a question. You were just saying that, I thought at the beginning you said that the codes are, the standards are set by a climate zone? So
the
there would be
benchmarks-
different in northern BC and Prince George than
Yes.
here, right?
yes, that's
Yeah.
right.
Okay,
Those
So-
benchmarks that you're required to meet step 3 are different in Prince George than they are here in the
Right.
southwestern
Okay.
BC.
so we have easier
Yeah.
standards here. Okay, thank you.
So when it came to the implementation of something like this, let's say theoretically that we did accept step 3 as the target for Bowen, and somebody's building away. Gary, you're building a house and you have done the modeling thing at the beginning, you tweaked your plans, and then someone comes and does the test, and you fail the test, unfortunately. You unfortunately failed the test. So what happens then? Is it a matter of the building inspector looks at this report and
The
tells us?
contractor would be on the hook to get that back up to where it should be, yeah.
Okay, so there is an enforcement element in this once you
Absolutely.
have adopted the level?
Right, because you wouldn't get your occupancy permit unless you demonstrated compliance with the
That's
bylaw.
So when do you do this test?
I'm sorry?
When do you do the test?
Generally, a blower door is done after the drywall, after the insulation is in and the envelope is sealed, but before the drywall goes on, so that there's still opportunity, it's still easier
Okay,
to
easy
patch
to fix.
and seal, yeah. And then they fix those issues, they retest, they meet the requirements, and they're good to go. That's how the process would work.
And they don't test again at final?
No, once it's met that after the drywall, before the drywall goes on, they've achieved compliance. Now, the homeowner could decide after they move in to cut a giant hole in the wall to, put a dryer pipe in that they hadn't thought of or something like that, and then that's entirely, But the whole point is that essentially you're designing the very envelope of the building to be as efficient as possible at the time it's cheapest to do that, when a house is being built and so place.
Also saw the thread on fireplaces, which of course is very apple pie on Bowen Island. I mean, a lot of people heat their homes with fireplaces.
Yeah,
But you can use an airtight certified.
That's right.
Same sort of airtight.
That's right.
yeah.
So an airtight wouldn't cause a problem?
no, it wouldn't.
No.
No.
So that's good.
So where do solar panels and all that stuff fit in? Is that 4 and 5?
So they don't, is the short answer, because the step code doesn't address energy supply, only how much is used. And the idea is that when you get to that higher steps level, if you want to reduce your energy bills and remove them, you can by adding solar or another renewable energy technology. I should point out as well, it's not listed as a benefit, but a high-performance home is more resilient to things like power failures. The reason we have wood stoves that are built into apple pie here is because we want to stay warm when the lights go out. Well, if you have a passive house level of performance, the heat in the building stays there for a long time. And so in terms of resilience to increasing storms, blackouts that last for days, you definitely want to be inside a better insulated home. You'll be more comfortable for that time, with only a small backup heat source needed.
So is there a quick and dirty summary of what each step code is that isn't as difficult to read as the building code?
It's not in the building code.
I know, but the building code's not easy to read for somebody who isn't even freshly drinking.
Not supposed to be.
So I would refer you to that best practices guide. which the municipality has a copy of it. It's very plain language, accessible, and it's, you could spend some time with it and thinking it through, and it's all in there.
And that's at the Energy Code Council.
I just Googled
Website.
step code and it's right here.
Yep, energystepcode.ca redirects you to the page on the provincial government website that has it.
Very admirable. I mean, it's obviously going in the right direction. Sorry, Maureen, will catch it. It's obviously going in the right direction, and it has to happen. I just hope the implementation isn't too draconian, that's all. Which brings me to the point of, where do we go from here? Now, I know some work's been done, Maureen, you've been
Very
working on-
little.
Very little, okay.
Yeah.
So I guess we're just investigating it this time.
Okay?
Yeah.
If council does decide that the municipality would like to use this, they're required to give a heads up to the province. There's a notification form on that same website that Allison's on, just saying, we're going to start talking about this with our builders, because 6 months' notice is required by local government before you actually implement it. So, they're very serious about not, making sure that engagement with your builders is an important part of this. So that's built into the process. And again, that Energy Step Code Council exists to oversee implementation and to identify issues and to serve as a forum for problem solving, unexpected things that come up and so forth. So,
I'm bringing forward the terms of reference for the Environment and Climate Action Committee on February 13th. And I think this might be a good group to refer to.
Absolutely, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Having said that, what happens in 2032 if you're not compliant?
well, every new building will be required as of that year to build to that step 5 level. So if you're not doing that, you're not getting a building permit.
Oh, interesting. So at that point in time, it's not an option.
Exactly, and also I wanted to mention as well, the code will follow along behind.
Yes,
As more
yeah.
local governments are getting a jump on where it's going anyway.
Yeah.
So the code will require that by 2032.
Yeah, as I said, there's quite a difference now between the code and the step code.
Exactly.
And the integration isn't exactly seamless at this point in time, but I'm sure it can.
Yeah. Well,
Yes.
the whole idea is it builds capacity. I mean, those costs are extra costs because it's
Yeah.
not common practice. When it becomes common practice, when the techniques or the materials are more widely available, those costs are expected to come down. And so code will follow along behind, and so that's the beauty of it.
Well, you can order your windows from Abbotsford.
Yeah.
Perfect, in a perfect world. Yeah, Maureen?
So my question has to do with how the North Shore governments are bringing their builders along. How are they, I mean, that's probably one of our next steps if we do decide that we want to adopt this. It's not, I don't think, high on the radar of builders on the island, or I might be wrong about that. I don't really know.
I think they're very aware of it, yeah.
They are?
Yeah.
Okay.
They've
So
heard about
then-
it through their professional associations who have contacted them about it.
So what are the North Shore folks doing with their builders?
So the one that I'm most aware of is the most recent one. West Vancouver has had a series of builders breakfasts and workshops where they've basically had informal conversations between staff and the builder community to answer questions, talk about listening to concerns, and so forth. And I think that level of engagement is got to happen. And it's written into the process of how this works. So the planner there, and also Emily Aiden and the city of North Van, I'm sure would be happy to share what they did and how they went about doing it. And again, there's that network of community energy planners and community planners for small governments that are sharing all of that information there as well.
And we have a new building inspector coming on board.
Starting with us on February 2nd, Greg Cornet. He's going to overlap with Conrad for 3 months. So
No
Conrad-
relation to
No, not that I'm aware of.
That's a good potential link to have a builder and community breakfast, introduce the new building
Yeah.
inspector and have some conversation around the step code.
Are the architects going to get involved?
February 2nd.
The architects going to get involved?
So architects are involved in that their professional association is on that council that developed it. And the AIBC, their regulatory body, should be communicating regularly with every registered architect about this and what it involves.
I just wonder if the modeler is gonna, the energy.
The energy modelers have their own industry association as well, and so materials going out through that network as well.
Okay, but they wouldn't overlap into the architectural side?
You know, different set of
Okay.
skills and services.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So what's their professional association called?
Oh, I knew you were gonna ask me that. I will email it to you. They've got a website, I can't remember what it's called, Canadian Energy Modelers.
Association.
Way too easy.
It's not that straightforward, but it's been a few weeks since I looked at it, so I'll find out.
Awesome. Anybody else?
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Question from the floor.
Absolutely.
A question from the floor.
Is there anything in the step code that addresses the size of houses? Like, can you have a 15,000 square foot house that's treated no differently than a 2,000 square foot house?
I'm pretty sure there's no restrictions on size. That would just mean it would be part 3 versus part 9.
But if it's, let's say it meets the part 9 threshold, like there's no bonus, say, for doing a smaller house.
I think it's easier for a medium size, it's easier and more affordable for certain typologies to meet it than others. And I think they had one interesting conclusion from that research was that tiny homes have a really hard time
That's, yeah.
meeting the
great.
set code. Eco sheds, essentially,
Yeah.
because they lose the economies of scale. that come-
Service area volume ratio.
Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. So there's a whole working group that's looking at that and trying to figure that out. So,
Okay.
Anybody else?
any other questions?
On the floor? Daniel, you got anything?
No, other than I'm excited, the new building inspector has worked with a passive home consultant.
Okay.
And has taught, he teaches in West Van on his alternate days to the West Van high school, secondary school, high school, and teaches carpentry and trades to students there, and he's been teaching them about the step code. So he came to James's presentation to the ABC, and so I'm excited that, you know, we could then look at for builders workshops, and he would have more to offer than if we held him down and I presented. I could present, you know, James's presentation to builders ask me what specifically do I need to do, need it, so I don't know, like build something thicker maybe, but Greg would be able to offer some more details and advice for people.
Great. All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sure, enjoyed the presentation,
Thank you.
and there'll be lots more to follow.
Good stuff.
Now, are you changing anything as you go along, sort of? You're getting more knowledge all the time about this, or is
Yeah.
this pretty well set in stone, your program, you're moving it forward? Or is there?
So I've been supporting the Step Code Council with communications,
Yeah.
and I'm just staying involved. I still have an ongoing contract to help them get the word out on what it is and how it works.
Yeah,
through
but
various
the actual step code, they've got that pretty well set in stone. It's not
It's not
evolved.
set in stone, it's
Okay, so it is
movable,
evolving.
as it's being used,
Okay.
and also there's there isn't part 3 available for the whole province yet. They're still working on that for the north, but there
Okay.
aren't many really large buildings up there, so that's why it wasn't prioritized. But they're definitely, the council is authorized to advise the government on changing those targets if they need to be adjusted. So
Yeah, okay, that's interesting, at least they're flexible, eh?
yeah, for sure.
That's good, thank you, James.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Meeting adjourned?
Motion to adjourn.